In 1984, a 16-year-old Mike Piazza had a visitor come to watch him hit the baseball in a batting cage his father had crafted at his Phoenixville, Pennsylvania home. The visitor, with his keen eye, said, quote, "Damn, this kid looks good. He really looks good. I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't think I hit the ball as good as he does when I was 16. This kid hits the ball harder than I ever did at 16. They should have the scouts on him already. I'll be your agent, buddy." Close quote. That visitor was Ted Williams, the greatest baseball hitter of all time. Hall of Fame catcher Mike Piazza on his life in baseball and his Catholic faith now. My name is Todd Warner, and this is the Evangelization Culture Podcast from Word on Fire. Mike Piazza was born and raised in Pennsylvania. Brought up by Vince and Veronica Piazza, he became a standout baseball player at a young age. After spending a year with the University of Miami Hurricanes, he transferred to Miami-Dade Community College, where he was picked up late in the draft by the Los Angeles Dodgers. After 4 years in the minor leagues, he debuted in September of 1992. Thereafter, Mike's career skyrocketed, playing with 5 different major league teams and winning the 1993 National League Rookie of the Year, playing in 12 All-Star games in 16 seasons, and winning 10 Silver Slugger Awards. Mike retired in 2007 with a career batting average of .308, 427 career home runs, and was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2016. Mike is married to Alicia and is the father of Nicoletta, Paulina, and Marco. Mike is a practicing Catholic. Mike Piazza, welcome.
Thank you. So great to be here. Appreciate it.
Segment 1, Meet Mike Piazza. In 2020, one of Mike Piazza's many honors was to have the street in front of the New York Mets spring training facility in Florida named after him. As Mike graciously received this honor, he noted that the city, Port St. Lucie, was named after St. Lucia, a Sicilian saint. In considering his father's roots in Sicily and the great inspiration his father had provided him throughout his lifetime, Mike became visibly emotional. It was clear just how much his dad has meant to him. Mike, could you tell us a little bit about Vince and Veronica Piazza and the role they played in your life?
Wow. I mean, it would be kind of dating myself, I guess, but basically a typical suburban childhood just outside of Philadelphia. Mainly, when we were young, middle class. I mean, my dad wasn't. Came out of the army actually with $400 mustering out pay, he told me, and was actually drafted to go into the Korean War. Fortunately, he came out of the army and started a small business, was really good with his hands. He was a mechanic and started a small car business, which eventually now has grown to over 30 stores in the Philadelphia area. But I think the interesting contrast was my mother, who was of Slovakian descent, and Slovakia is a predominantly Catholic country. I mean, very, very strong Catholic country. So her mother, my grandmother, didn't speak a word of English actually, and basically was very, very devout. And I remember as a kid going to Christmas Eve celebration, we practiced the Slovakian tradition, which was the soup and breaking of a piece of orange and a walnut, and basically the theory was that the family that eats from the same fruit will stay together and be called back together over the years. So, but yeah, as a young child, and my brothers, I mean, I had 4 brothers, and we used to mix it up a lot because we were very competitive, of course. But I just remember that sort of contrast. I mean, my dad was a stoic, hard-headed, Sicilian type of really no nonsense guy, and my mom was obviously the glue of the family and made sure that she formed us in the faith. And it was a great life. I enjoyed it. I mean, it was bike riding, building forts, playing pickup football, baseball, soccer, and all the fun stuff as a kid. Very innocent. Little league. So it was, it was a really nice childhood. And even though we weren't rich until my father really started, I was actually out of high school before it became very successful. But it was something we made the best of it.
Yeah.
And my mom always used to say used to have to stretch the dollar. I mean, we ate a lot of bread and pizza nights, and it was funny. But it was great. And like I said, it was innocent, but it really inspired us to not only appreciate what we have, but actually try to work to achieve more as well.
Mike, did you alluded to this and very well. So the Slovak heritage and the Sicilian heritage, and kind of with it the Catholic heritage, that sounded like it was pretty interwoven throughout as part of the fabric of your upbringing. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and again, I know my dad was faithful, but he was almost too busy working.
Sure.
He was a very traditional role. I mean, he believed that the woman was to nurture the home and to take care of the children, and he was the breadwinner. So at the end of the day, it was very that was tradition. I mean,
Yeah.
that was just what people did. So at the end of the day, I think he let my mom just sort of run with that, and she really took the reins and made sure we went to church. And if we misbehaved in church, she would punish us. And when we were at the shore in New Jersey, I remember going down to Wildwood, New Jersey, and she would pull us off the beach because I think Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken, at that time had John Cardinal Kroll, who was the bishop, and he was very, very traditional.
Mhm.
He was the last archdiocese in the country to actually have a vigil mass on Saturday. So when we
Oh,
went down
wow.
to New Jersey, it was Saturday and we were on the beach. We're like, Mom, wait. She's like, we got to go to church. We got to go to church. So she would pull us off the beach and we would lug to church. And I remember there was no air conditioning and it was hot, it's summer, and all the ladies are there fanning themselves. And we sat there, and
Yeah.
it was great. But even if I tell people your children, even if they're not 100% with it, you get it through osmosis.
Yes. Yes.
So I tell kids all the time, and consequently, I never forget a sermon one time. Like never, yeah, you have to form your kids, but don't be afraid to take them to church. When I hear a crying baby in church, I don't get offended or I don't
Right.
feel like, oh, what are they doing? I mean, I remember a priest at St. Patrick's about 10 years ago. He said, when you hear a child in church, be grateful and
Yeah.
positive because that's the future of the
Yep.
church. So when kids are crying, now of course there's always limits. You have to try to contain it, but at the end of the day, um, that's something it never bothers me. It never does. So I think we should take our kids to church, and it does work through osmosis. I think it's very important.
I think that's so funny you say that because my wife the other day, or my daughters were kind of talking about kind of the noise in church, and my wife looked at her and said, or looked at both of them and said, "You look, like you said, this is the future of the church. This is we want families to come there. We want them to be welcomed." I mean, and yes, the other thing is, I love that notion of osmosis. There is a rhythm of faith, and that comes with what you're going to go to mass on Saturday night or Sunday morning. That's what you do each week. It's not a question. It's not a question whether you go on vacation. My mother-in-law, one of the things she always would say is, why would we ruin a good vacation by not going to mass? And so, and
Yeah,
so
true.
it becomes a part of that rhythm. And when it's part of the rhythm, it's harder to fall away because it's what it's the bones of your upbringing and so on.
Well, and you have to build a celebration around it as well. Like for me, it's the most important part of the weekend, and it's actually the thing I most look forward to with my family. And there could be a reward system too. Bribery always works. So with my son, if he behaves and he wants a dessert at lunch after mass, I kind of reward him. So you have to use by any means necessary. But I think it's also I think as the leader of the house for me, I have to put those rules down
Yeah.
and it's a non-negotiable. Like I don't do this whole well let them choose and no. Like you go to church, you show up, and you make the effort, and that's the rules of the house. I mean,
Yes.
when you're out at your own home and you're paying your own bills, and God forbid you fall away, that's we can't control that. I mean, you can only do so much when they're in the nest, but I think when they're in the home, it's a non-negotiable. We pray at dinner, we pray at family dinner, and we go to mass on Sunday together, and it's just culture. I mean, it's a non-negotiable. I don't really think it should be up for debate, and I get troubled when I hear people, oh, no, just get it done. That was my dad's favorite expression. Just get it done, Mikey. So, um, tell don't be afraid to take control, because I think people want to be led. I think children want to be led, and
Yeah.
it's a love that they will feel. They may not always appreciate it at the time, but you just have to do it.
We're going to talk about your mom and the gift of the Catholic faith that was imparted to you through your mom kind of later in our conversation here. But it is interesting the stats that talk about the impact of a father having a strong faith is almost one of the. I think it is considered maybe the most or one of the most influential aspects as to whether kids will ultimately continue their faith going forward is whether dad practiced faith and was engaged in the faith in their childhood home. And to your point about the notion of, gosh, we're just let them decide, let them, it's sort of like, well, you're not necessarily letting your kid decide whenever they want to go to bed and what they want to eat. And I mean, there's freedoms that come as time goes by, but at the end of the day, the backbone of faith, the essentials of moral principles, we shouldn't be so laissez-faire about that, especially when kids are at their most impressionable age, because otherwise it's a recipe for falling away. So I really appreciate kind of, you're not being draconian, you're just being principled and firm and saying this is what we do, and later you'll understand exactly why if you don't understand that right now.
No, and another example too is like and my wife, and I got to give her a lot of credit because she's just also the same sort of. But when we go out for friends one time, we went over for a drink of wine with good friends of ours, and they were very like, it was like 10 o'clock and their kids were still up, and I'm like, the kid's gonna go to bed. They're like, oh, they want to be with us. I'm like, kids gotta go to bed. Like, this is adult time. So my wife had this like, this is adult time, and the kids need to be in bed. And I know that's kind of a trivial example, but that's just part of it. I mean, I think we get, the first rule of parenting, in my opinion, is just don't be afraid of not being liked.
Yeah.
That's just it. Like, I'm not your buddy. Maybe later in life when you have your own and you're building your and you're paying your own bills, and okay, then we can kind of be friends. But right now, I'm your parent.
Yeah.
And again, I think the discipline part of it is very important. And I just think sometimes it's don't be afraid. I mean, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be there.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
That's wonderful. By the way, on that note, there's a great book, My Father Left Me Ireland, by a guy named Michael Brendan Doherty, and he talks about being raised effectively by a single mom. And one of the things who did a wonderful job in many respects, but sometimes he said in the book, he said, "I wish she was a little harder on me at times. I wish she would have laid on the law a little bit more often sometimes." And so I think reinforcing the notion that, like you said, you're not your child's friend. That will evolve. First, you're their guide, you're their mentor,
Yeah,
you're their parent.
discipline is love. I mean, there's a great scene in the Bull Durham movie when the Kevin Costner character said, okay, it's time to air him out. And the manager comes in, he's throwing chairs. I mean, so it's kind of like discipline is love, really.
Yeah.
And again, even being heavy-handed within reason, it just shows you care.
Yeah.
It really shows you care. Because if you don't, you just go play in the street. Or what time should I come home? Hey, anytime you want. It doesn't matter, And I think this is the one thing that, like that gentleman you just mentioned, it is true. Discipline is love.
Yeah.
And when you tell them to go to bed on time, you tell them to get up on time, and you tell them to dress a certain way, and you tell them certain things with you are non-negotiable, it makes an impact in their life. And I think, and also compliments too. You can't just be what do you call it, like a dictator all the time.
Yeah.
You also have to give positive praise as well when it's warranted.
So, Mike, let's move into the discipline side of things. Specifically, let's talk about the discipline of baseball for you. So let's start with, how were you first introduced to the game of baseball, and then what role did your dad play in the cultivation of baseball as kind of your life sport?
Yeah, well, my dad would probably not be the prototypical politically correct parent today. I mean, it was first and foremost, I think he just loved baseball. I mean, coming from a family of Italian immigrants, and that whole story of when the Italians came over, they wanted to assimilate into American society. So a lot of them gravitated towards baseball because they like, if I could be a good baseball player, then I will be accepted as an American, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that Tony Lazzeri, Yogi Berra, all of the Rocky Calavita, all the old time guys. That's all they talked about why, excuse me, they wanted to be baseball players. And so my dad had that same mentality. But actually, of course, he loved Joe DiMaggio, but his favorite player was Ted Williams. And once I started demonstrating an ability to possibly play baseball, then at 10 years old, he said, if you want to do this, you have to, you got to work at it. And he bought me a cage and a batting machine. And from there, it kind of clicked into, I saw myself getting better. And every year when I saw myself hitting the ball further and getting better and better, it became like a drug almost. It became like addictive. And so every year I would work harder and harder and harder. Once I got to high school, then it turned out that I was definitely showing the ability to play professional.
Yeah. Did you, I'm going to ask you, because this is for the people that are out there kind of pursuing their dreams and so on. How hard was it to do what you were doing? Let's just go through high school. How much work was it? When you talk about this, was this a day after day after day kind of a thing? I mean, were there days you're
Yeah.
grumbling and saying, I like doing this, but do I like doing this much? Do I really want to? What was the discipline like?
Yeah. I mean, I forget what somebody mentioned years ago when I was doing an interview about the 10,000 hour rule.
Mm,
And I forget which sort of example or whatever the application is. The point is, to really be great at something, you do have to. I mean, I hear these expressions: "Great players or hitters are born; they're not made," and whatnot. I don't believe that. I mean, I think if you have to have a certain amount of physical ability. Of course, you have
yeah.
to have hand-eye coordination. You have to have strength. You have to be wanting to work and do have that sort of work ethic. However, I do believe you have to go in the cage, and
Yeah.
that's what I did. It was just through work, and I sacrificed a lot. But also, I didn't feel like I was missing out on everything. It's like I didn't really get caught up in all the social activities of being a kid or a
Hmm.
teenager.
Hmm.
It just was my personal nature, and I think when my dad really looked at all the sons and he said, "Okay, which one could be a ball player?" Me, because he just knew I could take the discipline, the pounding, and the work involved. And my other brothers had different skills. I mean, one brother's an attorney. They all work in successful business. But I think as a sports, he kind of thought and knew that I would be the guy that could do it. Um, but it just listen. I learned a lot by failure, and I learned a trial and error. If I could have done it again, of course, hindsight's 2020. I probably wouldn't have to dedicate so much time on certain things,
Sure.
but that was my lab, and I mean, I broke a lot of test tubes. It's just you have to learn what you can do and what you can't do. And the good thing is now, looking back on that, I'm able to help kids more because I feel like sometimes that they spend so much time. I mean, if you're practicing the wrong thing, you're not going to get any better.
Right.
You have to practice. They say practice makes perfect, and I amend that and say no, perfect practice makes perfect
Oh,
because you
good.
do have to practice the right way because you could be doing something wrong and you're just not going to get any better. But so I learned that through trial and error, but it also taught me a lot, and it also allowed me to prosper later because I had such a discipline in my mind. I was able to dissect the swing front, left, right, and knew what I can do and what I couldn't do. And then as I got older, I became more experienced, but also different coaches came into my life that really helped me,
Mm.
and I was able to continue to develop that way.
I want to go back to our introductory anecdote, you meeting Ted Williams. What was
Mm,
that? What was that like? So he's already a hero of yours, right?
yeah,
And so there you are, and we'll get into the your relationship with Tommy Lasorda and so on.
sure.
But what was it like to have Ted Williams standing there in the yard, looking at you and giving you some pointers and so on, and saying what he was saying? I don't know if you could hear him because you had the helmet on and you're hitting the
Yeah,
ball.
yeah.
What was that like?
It was incredible. I mean, my father, you mentioned, was close with Tommy Lasorda, and then he was also very close with some scouts in the area. And the scout in that picture was actually a guy named Eddie
Mm.
Liberatore in Italian. And he was the scout for the Dodgers and the Orioles. And he was very close with Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio. And at the time, back then, the card show gig was like he would call him up and say, "Hey, there's a promoter here wants to give you, $5 grand or 10 grand for a card show. Will you come by?" And he was like, "Yeah." And he came in the area. And so he was doing a card show at the George Washington Motor Inn in King of Prussia,
Mm.
and Eddie Liberatore said, "Hey, my buddy Vince has this kid, and he has a backyard batting cage, and he's a pretty good looking young hitter." And Ted's like, "Let's go see him hit." And so next thing I know, my dad told me Ted Williams is coming over, and I was like, Ted Williams. He's like, yeah. And so, I mean, you could probably tell I was so nervous. I was so visibly nervous because I read his book and memorized it from front to back. And I mean, as a kid, I was a student of the game,
Yeah.
and it was I was very nostalgic about the game. So
Yeah.
I knew he was there, and so when he was when he left, um, obviously I was on cloud nine.
Yeah.
But I will say one thing, that in that video, I don't know if it comes across. I know it comes across in the original, but as he's walking out, he says something I'll never forget. And he says, "But that's only half the battle.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
The other half, the other half is between the ears, making adjustments, adjusting the pitchers, situations, hitting the breaking ball, adjusting the off speed." So that line isn't really on there, but for me, I remember it, and I couldn't have think of a more sort of relevant or appropriate line. Even though I showed a lot in batting practice, there's been a lot of guys that can hit well in batting practice, but transferring that into a game situation was another story.
On that note, because just the way you talk and the way I've heard you interviewed and read your work and so on. You're a thinker, you're an analyst. And I know that for people who have analytical minds, it serves them well, but also it can backfire because sometimes you can get stuck in your head. So
Sure.
how did you, on that notion, on the battle kind of between the ears, how did you, and again, we're going to get into the deeper details of your career here, but how did you navigate that double-edged sword of the analytical mind that helps you get better and the analytical mind that can plague you and kind of sort of work against you? What's your sense about that?
Well, I believe we're all given certain gifts, and how we develop them is really up to us. And I believe I was gifted the ability of focus
Mhm.
and the gift of rationalization. So what I mean by that is, I was always able to put it in perspective and sort of alleviate pressure from myself. I think we get into trouble where we put too much pressure on ourselves, and let's face it, all pressure is self inflicted. I mean, there's outside sources like writers and um, expectations and all kinds of friends, family that try to tell us different things. But when it comes right down to it in its purest and simplest form, you have to be able to block everything else out and concentrate on the task in hand. And I would use visualization. Like when I teach kids hitting, it's funny. This sounds so very elementary and kind of childish, but when I teach little kids hitting, I say, look, you're going to laugh, but when I was in the on deck circle, I actually had a vision of like a tiger in the jungle stalking his prey. And it sounds very simple, but it was a very simple visualization that allowed me to relax. And then I became that tiger in a way. I became the tiger who was stalking his prey, who, if he didn't catch that prey at that time, probably wouldn't eat for a couple of weeks or whatever. As I started reading more and realizing that they have that one chance to make that kill, and if they don't, they probably won't eat for a week. I mean,
Yeah,
they have
yeah.
to. So my point is this: you have to break things down into its simplest terms and eliminate all distraction.
Mm.
And I was able to do that. And I again also had a little bit of a temper internally,
Mm-hmm.
which I've demonstrated at times, and it did come in handy. I mean, it just made me like aggressive, like an animal, angry, and I was able to sort of channel those emotions and make myself a better hitter.
Is that a temperament, that notion, that focus, that imaging you did? Are these tricks are not tricks that cheapens it? Are these things you learned? Are these things that you would say I feel like I was kind of wired this way a little bit? What's your sense about that?
I think both, but I think if you don't have a strong fundamental foundation of the swing or whatever endeavor you're
Yeah,
attempting,
yeah.
then those things won't make much sense. Because if you don't have, see, so I knew I tuned my swing in practice where I knew if I was swinging
Mhm.
well, nobody could get me out, and I knew if I
Mm.
wasn't swinging well, anybody could get me out. So it really came into sort of self. I guess, lack of a better word, self awareness and practice. So if I was healthy and I was swinging well, then I could transfer that into the mental game. But if I had like an injury or I wasn't 100%, then I would have to sort of try to,
Yeah.
to use a different tact. And so it really comes down to that thing you just mentioned, or it comes with the
Yeah.
confidence that my swing is right,
Yeah.
or whatever I'm doing is right, and then that helped me get to a higher level.
Segment 2, The Underdog. As Mike Piazza recalled, I think I was probably around 12 years old, and Los Angeles Dodgers coach Tommy Lasorda said to a batting coach in Dodger Stadium, "Hey, take Mike down in the cage and throw him some batting practice, and we'll come check him out." As Piazza continued, "Well, I'm with the wood bat," says Mike, "and just smashing the ball. Tommy was walking up the tunnel with my dad, and Tommy said to my dad, 'Who the hell is that hitting?' He turned around, and it was me." So, Mike, let's talk briefly about your family's relationship with the legendary coach Tommy Lasorda. How did you guys know him?
Well, my dad grew up with him in Norristown, Pennsylvania, and Tommy was a few years older than my dad. And so when my dad went into the Army, or actually I should say came out of the Army, Tommy was around. I think he was with the Royals, and when in the off season, Tommy would still come back to Norristown, and they just kind of reconnected. And Tommy went through his career with the Dodgers, and my dad continued to build his business. And I think eventually Tommy then got to the big leagues as a coach. I think in 73 or 74 with the Dodgers. Walter Alston was a manager. And I remember, I think it was 77, or excuse me, it was 76. I'll never forget, I was in third base box seats at Veterans Stadium, and Tommy Lasorda at number 52 was the third base manager. And my dad called out to him, and he turned around and he said hi to my dad, and all the fans were like, "Wow, who is this guy that knows the third base coach?" So it was an interesting moment. I think my dad told me. I think he told me that they would yell their certain players. Tommy's favorite was this pitcher, Van Lingo Mungo. I forget Mungo
Sure,
is the last
sure.
name, I believe, Italian guy, of course. And so then they started joshing during the game, and I just remember, wow, my dad knows one of the players or the coach. It was so cool. So they knew each other, and then when Tommy got the job, I'll never forget. I mean, there's a famous picture in my book of Dusty Baker holding up my brother and I at
Yeah.
the champagne party after they beat the Phillies to go to the World Series. So I mean, I grew up around it. I mean, my dad Tommy made me the bat boy when I was 12 years old at Veterans Stadium. So
Yeah.
it was kind of in my blood. I mean, it was just kind of always meant to be. It was a very strange phenomena because, I mean, and as a kid, also going in the locker room, you also the little bit of the shine comes off the ball. You think these
Yeah.
guys
Yeah.
are like gods, and they have this sort of aura. But you go in the locker room, there's clothes everywhere and jock straps, and everyone stinks, and the guys are getting showered.
There
I'm
goes
like,
the
okay,
dream.
this kind of saw the grit
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
saw the
Yeah.
grit, behind the glory type of thing. But it was an experience, and it inspired me. It really did. And so I just always had this belief that I was going to be there one day, even though it wasn't the most storied ascent to the major leagues. But it was still worth it. It was
So
worth
let's
every
get into
step.
that.
It
You
was worth
graduate
it.
from Phoenixville High School. You're a standout first baseman.
Yeah,
You have an over 500 batting
yeah,
average your junior year, an 11 home run, and a 42 RBI senior year. You go to play baseball for the University of Miami
yeah.
Hurricanes, and what happens there?
Yeah, so I went down there on a scholarship, and as a freshman coming out of Pennsylvania, going down to one of the top um, collegiate programs in the country. I mean, a lot of the kids there had played in southern climates and had played 50, 60 games. I mean, I played 17, I think, senior games and some American Legion in the
Mhm.
summer. So I was overmatched. I was definitely over my skis. I mean, I was in over my head, and my career just halted. I mean, I had 9 at bats as my freshman year. And again, I wasn't really getting along well with the coaches. I don't know what they really quite thought of me. Maybe I was a little bit ignorant, maybe a little cocky. I have no idea. It was a long time ago, but I do remember being humbled. I mean, I remember like going, "Wow!" I thought I was going to cruise into University of Miami and become freshman All American and go to the College World Series, and it was boom, a bucket of cold water to the face. Going, "You're not as good as you think you are." And I say this, I tell people this expression, that nothing leads to failure more than a little success. Because if you think you're great and you think you got it all down, that can lead to hubris, sort of overconfidence, and it could humble you. But that whole experience was a positive. I mean, I think it made me more humble. It made me realize how difficult it was. And I tell people in all the time, I was like, well, if life was easy,
Yeah.
then what fun is that? Part of life is overcoming adversity, overcoming hardships, overcoming um, difficulties. Because if you meet your dragon and slay your dragon and conquer your dragon, that's more satisfying than something just happening easy. So yeah, that made me really appreciate how difficult it is to play baseball.
Do you think, and it sounds like this wisdom about, I mean, I know it really was, you didn't like the experience you're having, obviously, at Miami. Do you think some of those tidbits of wisdom you just described, were you aware of them then, or was it a struggle? I mean, was it when you ran up against that wall? I mean, has time given you that perspective, or do you think you had a little bit of the insight to say, okay, I've hit my wall here. Now I'm going to double down, and we'll talk about going to Miami-Dade, but how did you cope with it at the time?
Well, I also, yes, I was. It also allowed me to watch and learn by watching. I
Mm,
learned and learned from different players. Like for example, there was this pitcher from the University of Miami, Kevin Sherry, and I'm coming out of high school and I'm thinking I'm a good hitter, and he was drafted, I think, by the Cardinals. He was a very, very good college pitcher. He threw me what I probably experienced was the first slider
mm.
that I had ever seen, and I had to check my shorts because I had never seen a pitch like that. And literally, I'm sitting there saying to myself, "What the hell was that pitch?" And it was like a fastball that just took a hard left turn. And I said to myself, "I gotta hit this thing." Like, I mean, so it was a revelation, man. It was like, man, like I said, the dragon. It was the first time the dragon spit fire at me, and I was like unprepared. But I knew it. I mean, I knew it, and it just was a moment. And he was very kind to me, man. He was. Yeah, I have been so blessed in my life with mentors and coaches and people that just. And maybe part of it was my upbringing because I was taught to just be quiet sometimes and listen, and but he
Mm.
took me under his wing and just was like, "Hey, man, you got to if you want to hit up here, you're gonna have to hit that stuff." And he was just really, really cool, and it made an impact. Inspired me. So I tell people, listen, God will put people in your lives, little angels, and if we're so ignorant and not willing to hear them, you're gonna miss the opportunity. It's almost like. It's kind of like when God came to Elijah in a whisper, right? He didn't come
Yeah.
as God, which you would think riding in on a chariot from the skies. It was a whisper. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't an earthquake. And I think He puts little whispers in your life, and you have to be listening. Uh, because if
Yeah.
you're not listening and you're always worried about uh, bragging or whatever, like I tell people, you don't have to tell me how good you're going. I'll tell you. You know what I mean? You don't have to
Yeah.
brag. And I think we're in the
Yeah.
society today where it's all about me, me, me. What am I doing? Let's talk about me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think we can sort of tune that back a little bit. And so I was able to recognize the people that were put in my life to help me.
By the way, on that note, we do sleepwalk past those graces all the time.
Mm,
And like you said, we're kind of deaf to it and or blind to it. And I think that just that call to be kind of aware, pay attention, and even in the painful moments when someone's saying, "Yeah, you stink at hitting this pitch, but I'm going to help you."
yeah.
Okay, I humble myself. I'm sitting at your feet. Show me the way. So that's great. So you shift over to
Yeah.
Miami-Dade North Community College. Was that a difficult decision, and what happened there?
No, it wasn't. Actually, Tommy knew I played for Demi Maneri, God rest his soul, who was the all time winningest junior college coach in history. And his son,
Mm,
Paul Maneri, was the coach at St. Thomas University, then went to Air Force, then went to Notre Dame, and then went to LSU. And I believe, had a really good career, well, had a great career at LSU. So it was a very, very deep baseball family. And Demi was great. I mean, he was a doctor in education, and he was just a great
mm,
coach
mm.
and funny, kept us loose. put me in, started me at first base, and gave me an opportunity, and I delivered. I got hurt that year. Actually, one of the main scouting times of the year, I hurt my left arm hand. I tore a ligament. But the Dodgers, like I said, at that point decided to draft me anyway. Tommy said, let's draft him and see, and then follow him and see what happens. And there was the discussion at that time of changing me into a catcher. So I went to spring training with the Dodgers in Vero Beach that year for a few days and worked out and started throwing a little bit. And Joe Ferguson, who was their coach at the time, said, he's got a good arm, actually, and he could probably catch. So we kind of shelved that until the draft, and the Dodgers drafted me in the last round and decided to just take a chance on me, and didn't really understand, or they didn't really think I was going to sign. But about a week before school started, I was going to go to St. Thomas University, actually, in Miami, who Demi's son, Paul, was the coach at the time. And so I went out to Los Angeles Dodger Stadium for a tryout. And I remember Ben Wade and Gib Baudet and Bobby Darwin were working me out. And they said to Tommy, they were like, man, what this guy's incredible. I mean, the way he hits the ball. And Tommy said, listen to Ben Wade. He said, if he was a shortstop hitting like this, would you sign him now? And Ben goes, absolutely. He goes, well, if he was a catcher hitting like this, would you sign him now? And Ben goes, absolutely. He goes, well, sign him. He's a catcher. and Ben was like, no, he's not. He's a first baseman. And Tommy's like, no, he's going to catch. So that's when he came into me and he said, you know what? We're going to offer you $15,000 to sign. I suggest you take it. And I did. And then sent me to Instruction League, which I worked with Johnny Roseborough, the great Johnny Roseborough, and Kevin Kennedy. And I remember, it's funny going back to listening. Johnny was giving his lectures, and he was always very like this cerebral, philosophical catching. And Kevin Kennedy was like the drill sergeant, blocking balls and doing. And Johnny Roseborough goes, he had a cigarette. God rest him. He was a great guy, and he used to smoke. And he used to go, Mikey, I think you're going to be okay in this game. I said, why? And I won't use the profanity, because he goes, because you know how to shut the F up and listen. And I was like, because I'm talking to Johnny Roseborough. I mean, this guy caught Don Drysdale. He caught Sandy Koufax, Claude Olstein, all the great teams of the 60s. So I'm like thinking, how am I going to tell Johnny Roseborough? So it was really, really cool. So again, he was another guy that came into my life who made a huge impact when I had signed. And I worked, man. I mean, that's another thing. As a catcher, I mean, every day, Kevin Kennedy blocking balls, throwing. I mean, just crazy. I mean, so much work, but again, it was fun. It was just me against the world, and I had no responsibilities. I mean, I had a loving family back home that was supporting me, and fortunately, no mouths to feed, and so I just went for it. It was a great experience.
Hi, I'm Todd Warner, Managing Editor of Evangelization Culture, the journal of the Word on Fire Institute. Word on Fire is a global evangelical community that exists to provide our members with the resources they need to proclaim Christ to a secular culture. Our award-winning quarterly journal, Evangelization Culture, is offered exclusively to Word on Fire Institute members. It's a tangible representation of our mission and goal to lead with beauty in order to bring others to the knowledge of truth. Inside each issue, you'll find writing from premier scholars and inspiring pieces on literature, culture, and daily life from fellow missionaries on the journey to know and serve Christ. Get a copy of the current issue of the Evangelization Culture Journal for free by visiting wordonfire.org/journal. Thank you, and join us in bringing Christ to a hungry culture. Segment 3, the show, and Mike, you stole my thunder. I was going to tell the story about is it Ben Wade?
Ben Wade, yeah.
And you already did it, which is a good, yeah. It just to reiterate, Lasorda saying, if this guy who's hitting as well as Mike Piazza is hitting, if he were a catcher, would you sign him? Yes. And then, of course, you're a first baseman, and he says you're a catcher now, and then the rest is history. I wanted to ask you, so let's zoom in for 1 second. So it's 1988. You're 20 years old, and you're drafted in the 62nd
Mm-hmm.
round. Like you said, I think it's the last round the Dodgers are drafting in. The number that sticks is 1390. I've seen 1390 out of 1433. Who knows?
Yeah,
Very, very far,
it
very,
was
very
low.
deep into the, yeah, very deep into the draft. And yet not quite kind of the Mr. Irrelevant, so to speak. But the first thing is, regardless of the number, what was it like to be told, here's your ticket, son? What was that like for you when you realized I'm number 1390 as a draft into the major leagues, obviously with minor league to be determined and so on and so forth? What was that like?
It was both good and bad. I mean, it was good only because I felt like I got a chance. I mean, I had a small crack in the door and I was able to get through, but also pressure in a way
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
knew teams are not going to keep 62nd round draft picks around for long if they can't do anything. So I knew at that point I had to perform. I had to do
Yeah.
something. I had to show something. And as I mentioned, all the work that I had done with Johnny and Kevin, then it was time to go out and show what I can do. And it was difficult because again, you're treated like just like a commodity. I mean, there's no
Mm-hmm.
respect. You know, go to the bullpen, do this, do that. Lot of work. But I will say this: that sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Lack of a better word, being treated like crap.
Mm-hmm.
It builds character. It really does. And I wasn't afraid of work. And Tommy, to his credit, God rest his soul, he put us in games. I mean, we worked so much. We would have games in spring training, and then I would hear on the walkie-talkie because I'm like, oh, here we go, and Piazza up to the big league game, and I'd go up to the big league game, and every now and then he would sneak us in the big league game. I mean, we're in A ball, we're in A ball or Double A, and he just wanted to, and not just myself. I mean, Eric Karros, Eric Young, all these other guys that I'd come up with. He
Mm-hmm.
really believed in putting players in over their head and seeing how they could react or seeing if they adjusted. Some guys couldn't handle it and some guys could. And for me, I loved it. And so once I started getting that confidence, and I knew I could climb the ladder. But
Yeah.
digressing just a bit, I mean, also in a sense, knowing that I had to catch was funny because I mean I had gone to instructional league, my first instructional league, and the Dodgers had signed Eric Karros, Henry Rodriguez, and this other very good college first baseman named Brian Traxler. And I looked at
Mm-hmm.
first base and I said, "Well, I'm not playing there, so I better stick it out here behind the
An
plate."
honest assessment. You made an honest
I
assessment.
mean, it was just basically either I play here or I'm going home, and that was pretty much it. But again, and the first for a few years, I mean, I went to Salem, Oregon, and I went to Bakersfield. I went to Vero Beach, and it was tough, man. It was.
Yeah,
I'm running
yeah.
back to the dugout, and ironically, talk about angels in your life or whatever. I mean, um, there was a scout. A scout. Oh God, I forgot the gentleman's name. He wrote a really, really good book called "You Bet Your Bottom Dollar." But he was a scout with the Montreal Expos when they had drafted a certain high school pitcher, and they converted him to a catcher. And he went to watch him in the minor leagues, and he said to the coach, "Why isn't he catching?" And he said, "Well, he's not that good. He's running back to the backstop, and he can't catch that well." So he told the coach, either you catch him or you're fired. And that player was Gary Carter. And so he transferred that story to my minor league manager when he wasn't playing me as much. And he said, "Let me tell you a story about Gary Carter." And he said the same thing with Piazza. He said, "Play this kid because this kid's going to be in the big leagues." And of course, going up against college catchers and guys that had played Division One, I wasn't that good, but they saw something in me, and eventually I was able to separate myself from the pack, and like I said, stuck around just long enough to show them something.
It's amazing. So you spent 4 years in the minors from 88 to 92. And again, we obviously look back and say, but in 92, things changed. but at the time, you're like you said, you're grinding it out. You're being told where to go, what to do, shifting hither and yon. Probably not you're not getting paid a ton, lots of pressure, ongoing adjustments. But you're loving this. I mean,
Mhm.
it seems like your feet. I mean, it's almost like it seems like you run to the pressure. You run to the. Is that a fair assessment? The way you sound, like if it's hard, give it to me. I'll work harder. There was some sort of feeding you had off of the pressure. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I think that's probably not to get too critical of modern society,
Yeah,
but I think we're so much into instant gratification, and I think part of the fun is the adversity. I mean, I
yeah,
remember riding on a bus. I went to Mexicali, and I was getting paid $1,100 a month, but it was there was free beer, so that's why that's why I say. But no, I mean, in all seriousness, we made the most of it. We pulled our money
yeah, yeah,
together. We
yeah,
bought Hamburger Helper. We all
yeah,
chipped in for beer. It was us against the world. And I think
yeah,
part of that Three Musketeers mentality is part of the fun. And then once you
yeah,
become rich, I guess, and start making money, then it's like, okay, it's a whole different world. Now it's fun, of course. It's nice to have nice things and work, but I'll never forget those days. And we laughed so hard. I mean, we had such incredible, great times in the minor leagues. I mean, I played with some really funny guys. We just laughed. It was like a comedy show, and so you couldn't be cocky. You couldn't be. They would chop you down. That's why you have to have the thickest skin to be on a team.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, they
yeah,
make
yeah,
fun of
yeah,
everything. I mean, your hair, your so you just have to roll with it. But that builds character, man. And I tell people, don't be afraid of the adversity in the journey. Um, and you do have to say, I say this, you will never appreciate anything in life if you don't work for it. I'm sorry. I That's just human nature. If something is given to you, you're not going to value it the same. And it's maybe kind of dumb, but if like for example, the Knicks call me today and go, "Hey, Mike, we'll give you tickets to the game tonight," and I'll go, maybe I want to go, maybe I don't want to go. But if I pay 5,000 each to sit on the floor at the Knicks game,
that's right.
I'm gonna go, right?
Yep,
Because I paid for it.
yep,
It's just human. But if they say, "Hey, do you want to?" I don't know. Okay, maybe I will, maybe I won't, and I'm flattered. Don't get me wrong. I'll always go to the next game if they invite me. But you get my point. Like if you're
yeah.
paying for something, and I'm sorry. It's the same thing in faith. It's the same thing in life. It's the same thing in love. If you don't work and you don't pay the price, you're just not going to value it the same way. That's just my personal philosophy.
Well, it's a little, if I can say, it's a little Theodore Rooseveltian. The man in the arena. I mean, there's this vigor in being, marred with blood and sweat and weary and uncertain of victory, and then you kind of have the tepid spectator. And no, there's plenty of us that are spectators for sports and all that. Nothing wrong with that. But if your life is lived kind of in the safe zone where all you do is you're tepid about everything, including the things that matter most, your family, your faith, etc. The long and the short of it is what is life? There's again, it's anemic, it's tepid, it's sort of it's bland, and like you said, you live big so you can love big and you can grow big and so on, and so don't be afraid to dip your toe or wade into the deeper waters, so to speak.
Well, and then of course, Pope Benedict XVI said, "This life can give you comfort, but you were not built for comfort. You were built for greatness."
Yep.
So, I mean, these people in that these sort of philosophies that I've been able to sort of pick up in my life have always been influential. And but yeah, I mean, again, not to say that you don't go through doubts. I mean, there's always going to be many times I
Yeah.
wake up and I say, "What the hell am I doing? Like, what am I doing?" And those moments were many where you start to think about what's this all about. But then you eventually just have to put that off to the side and just try to get it done. That's all you can do.
Yeah. So September of 1992, I think September 1st of 1992, you're playing in your first major league. You're called up. You're playing with the Dodgers against the Cubs. How did that first game go?
I mean, it was crazy. I mean, on a plane from Albuquerque to Chicago, and then playing in Wrigley Field for your first big league game, it was nuts. I mean, it goes back to Billy Russell, who was my manager, and when he called me in the office, I was like, I can't believe this. I mean, I cannot believe I'm going to the major leagues. It was
Yeah.
just a culminate. It was just you start thinking about it. You get really emotional because you start thinking about, man, all those times that I just mentioned where I'm thinking, what am I doing? And now you're on a plane to Chicago to play at Wrigley Field, and Tommy put us
Yeah.
in right
Yeah.
away. He's like, "No, you're playing today," and I'll never forget it. So Mark Grace was the first baseman for the Cubs, and I get up my first at bat, and I said, "You know what? I'm going to enjoy this." I said, "I'm going to take a few pitches because I'm not going to just swing at the first." So I ended up walking. Right? Isn't that nuts?
Oh, I
And
love
then
it.
and then my next at bat, I'm like, all right, he's thinking I'm going to take pitches now. And he threw one right down the middle, and I jumped on it for my first hit. And actually, it's funny. I went 3 for 3 that day. And the next day in Pittsburgh, I started again, and I got a hit off Randy Tomlin. So I was my first 4 for 4 was in the major league. I was 4 for 4. But I remember
Wow.
my last hit at Wrigley, and I get on first, and Mark Grace looks at me and he goes, "You're really having problems making the adjustment to the major league." It was really fun. So yeah, it was a great moment. My dad was there, and obviously he was taking it all in and just kind of sticking his chest out. It was really cool, but it was yeah, it was definitely, you start to realize, and you get really internal, and you go, it was worth it. It is like,
Yeah.
you can do this. You if you sacrifice and you pay the price and you deprive yourself of things and you just never lose that focus, things will happen. It may not be what you expect. Like I tell people,
Yeah.
like, don't be afraid of change. Changes, or don't map out your life. What do the joke about, you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
be sort of open to going down a different path that you never thought.
Yeah, there's graces if you actually, I to your point, if you kind of allow, as one bright priest once said, leave space for gifts. If you leave space for gifts, you'll be stunned by what will appear. Doesn't mean it will be always devoid of suffering along the way, but
Sure.
you'll be stunned by what will appear. So in 1993, the very next year, Mike Piazza plays 149 games. He hit 318. You're pounding 35 home runs, driving in 112 RBIs. You sure came in. You came in with a bang. You get the National League Rookie of the Year, and you're selected to the first of your 12 All-Star games. I think, Mike, you put an exclamation at the end of the sentence saying you are no Mr. Irrelevant. What happened? Was this just kind of the culmination of what we've been talking about? Was there something that just kind of resonated that year to begin with? What happened in your eyes?
Well, it was funny. I remember, it's funny you mentioned that. Now I'm looking. There was a TV or a sports reporter in LA at the time named Jim Hill, and I was doing an interview before we broke for Los Angeles. We played at the time, before interleague games. We played the Freeway Series against the Angels, and he was interviewing me. I think I had gotten a base hit against Jeff Reardon, I believe, to win a major league, or the spring training game in extra innings or whatnot. And he was interviewing me with Tommy, and I remember him. They announced that I was going to be the starting catcher for the Dodgers that year. And Tommy said, well, or Jim Hill asked him on an interview, said, well, is it because he earned it, or is it because of nepotism, or because you know him or something? And but again, I tell people that was a blessing, because it really made me angry. I remember thinking to myself, I just won minor league player of the year, played around the
Yeah.
calendar for 3 years. I mean, it hit 360, I think, in AAA. Went to winter ball, had a great year in the Arizona Fall League, and he had asked that question. But again, it was a blessing, because it made me
Mhm.
angry, and it gave me a chip. It pissed me off. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I'm like thinking, when you're looking for praise and you're looking for congratulations, and someone kind of kicks you in the you know what, um, think of it as a gift, and it made me angry. So that year I played with a chip. I was angry. If I didn't get a hit, if I didn't get 3 hits, or if I got a hit, I wanted two. If I got two, I wanted three. If I had three, I wanted four. And if I didn't get a hit that last at bat, so So maybe again that was just putting a little bit of you know just vinegar in my tank. It helped.
Yeah, yeah. I love it. Over 16 years, Mike, from 1992 to 2007, you played for five different franchises: the Dodgers, the Florida Marlins, the Mets, the San Diego Padres, and the Oakland A's. Now, not detracting from any of the teams, it seems like the Mets are the team in which you we most likely call your home. First of all, is that fair to say? Not that you didn't have great experiences everywhere, but the Mets seems like that's kind of where you were most affiliated with in all of your successes. Um, would you just first of all, would you agree with that? And then second of all, could you say a word or two about the culture of the Mets on and off the field, what your experience was like?
Well, the short version was it was really interesting career for me because I mean I came up with the Dodgers and I think at the time when I was looking for a contract extension or I was coming up to free agency, they were being sold to Fox, and for some reason, and I'll say this too, I made mistakes. I'm sure they made mistakes. It was they had bought the team. We both dug our heels in, and it was a very contentious negotiation,
Mm,
and we just couldn't work it out. Again, I think a lot of it was immaturity for me, and maybe there could have been a different tact, but for whatever reason, um, they traded me. I mean, they traded me, I think, in '98, sometime in May, and traded me to the Marlins, who had won the World Series, but were dismantling a World Series team, which was really rare. So, if you think about these kind of anomaly events in my career, they're really strange. And the Marlins that Huizenga had it was dismantling a team, so they traded four players for me. They traded Johnson, I believe, Bobby Bonilla, um, Jim Eisenreich, and Sheffield, Gary Sheffield. So
wow, wow.
it was a crazy year for me. I was then 9 days, I believe, with the Marlins, and then they traded me to the Mets. And I will say, as much as it wasn't easy coming to New York after being 5 years in Los Angeles,
Hmm.
it I think it did make me better because I mean the fans, even though I wasn't playing that badly, but they expected me to get bigger hits. I just wasn't playing as well as I had hoped, and probably as well as they hoped, and they let me have it. And I was getting booed, and it was just another sort of, what do you call it? I mean, another cauldron moment, I guess, of pressure for me that I had to get through and win them over. Eventually signed a 7 year deal here. So even though I always really loved my time with the Dodgers, I mean, the Dodgers changed very quickly. Mr. O'Malley had sold the team. Peter had sold the team to Fox, and it became super corporate. So
Mm,
it was just time to move on. It was just not meant to
yeah,
be. But it brought me to New York, and I mean, I was like, gosh, I mean, 7 years here in New York is a long
yeah, yeah,
time. It aged me
yeah.
very quickly, but I will say that again, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
It's so striking and refreshing how much you look at certain dark or difficult periods as being edifying. Kind of if it doesn't kill me, makes me stronger. Adversity creates character. Um, and as Winston Churchill once purportedly said, if you're going through hell, keep going.
Mm,
And so it strikes me that what a strong philosophical bedrock, and I know your faith informs that, and we'll get more into that
mm,
in a minute. But it's striking because I do think, again, in a very therapeutic culture we're living in nowadays, sometimes it's either complaining about the pain or B, avoiding it at all costs and not rising to the occasion as the pain arises. So you've got this. It's I don't want to call it old school, but it's refreshingly old school that should become new school again. So I just want to make an observation of that. So
Well, I tell people the story about coming to New York, which was like I had signed a 7 year, $91 million contract with the Mets, and most people would think that'd be a cause for celebration. And I remember going out that night in New York for dinner after we had the press conference, and having a nice dinner, but also coming back to the hotel, and I was sleeping, and I was miserable. I
mm,
couldn't sleep. I was sweating. I was like, what did I just do? I mean,
mm,
I I don't know how I'm going to live up to the pressure. Um,
yeah,
Most people be like, who cares? You got the money guaranteed. It doesn't matter if you know. Um, don't do well, or if you crap out, who cares? You got the money. But I was terrified because of this internal ticker, or this force that wanted me to prove to everyone that I was worth it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so my point is, we think that this amount of money will all of a sudden make you happy and put you in this bliss of euphoria, and then you have nothing left to work for. But I felt it worse. I was like going,
Yeah.
how am I how am I going to play up to this contract? So again, I think that is just something that I was blessed with, this sort of, maybe this dysfunctional sort of feeling to want to please people or want to prove that I was worth it, where so many people today would be like, who cares? You got the money. You got the money. Who cares? So but that was just never a part of me.
Yeah. But boy, what a great story about doubling down and just saying, this is not going to be easy. I'm gonna have to work through this. I'm going to grind it out and grind it out and grind it out. And obviously the dividends are apparent. I wanted to talk about two quick games. I mean, there's so many. I mean, we could sit for hours and talk about these highlights. I mean, it's a great baseball career.
Thank you.
So, but two I want to mention was that you will come to memory. Are the September 21st, 2001. It's a game against the Braves at Shea Stadium. This is the first professional sporting event in New York since the 9/11 attacks. It's bottom of the eighth. The Mets are down 2-1, and then once again, Mike Piazza comes up to the plate. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's just something you can never put in perspective, only because of the non-baseball story
Yeah,
about it. I mean, talk about sort of being an out of body experience, because that whole week, it's difficult too to think. That's why I've always sort of did this little bit of suppression, because there was a lot of pain that week. There was
hmm
devastating pain, and the amount of families and the people we lost. I still look at that fence and I see their faces. It's
hmm
hard. It really is. So in a way, coming back to play baseball, there was it, it wasn't difficult to get out there, but then once the emotion of that week started hitting, then it became more difficult. And then that's when I
yeah,
just had to dig down deep and try to look into my heart and my faith. And I remember on the line just saying, Lord, just help me get through this night. I didn't even care about hitting a home run. I just wanted to survive emotionally, because we were all wrecks.
yeah,
And it was difficult. But again, when you feel uh, people pulling for you, when you feel that energy, it really empowers you, and it really puts wind under your wings. And so that, for me, was the reason why I was in that situation and came through. It wasn't me. I was just sort of the vessel, I guess, but it was the city and everyone kind of acting through me, if that makes sense. Because I don't really recall consciously what I was thinking. It just kind of happened, if that makes
yeah.
sense.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And the other thing is, and said it very at the very beginning, you have to earn New York's affection.
Mm.
And for you to have that support, it's sort of like the dad that's difficult to please. When you get a compliment, it means the world. Well, New York gave you, like you said, was giving you great props, and rooting for you and pulling for you. That was well earned. So
True.
I want to move forward. I want to move forward to the next game, with the next game on my very short list here. May 5th, 2004. It's the San Francisco Giants at Shea Stadium, and here you are. You're at the plate, and you plug out of the park your 352nd career home run. For those who aren't familiar with baseball records and so on, could you tell us what the significance of hitting 352 home runs as a catcher, what that really means?
Yeah, I mean, passing Carlton Fisk, who had the home run record for catchers, and even though interleague play had come in, and I had some home runs as a DH, and I think I played a little first base too, 2003, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but actually, to hit a home run as a catcher, it means you have to be playing the game as a catcher, so to speak.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
have to be catching the game, so, which obviously physically is a very demanding position.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
I look back and sometimes wonder how I did it myself, but it was just, again, just that whole the mentality of going through it. But yeah, I mean, to pass Carlton Fisk, who's a legend, and I mean Johnny Bench and for me in the 70s growing up was Johnny Bench, Carlton Fisk. I mean, those were the two main names. There were some great catchers that in that era, but those were the two that stood out the most. I passed Johnny, I think, a few years before for the National League record, and then to pass Carlton for the all-time record. What can you say, really? I mean, again, just thinking, but I became really reflective of all the people that helped me. One thing I've always been is just grateful, I guess. And I tell people, they say, "Well, what do you think is an important attribute?" I said, gratitude. Just every day, get up and thank God for this ability to live another day, and realize that it is difficult at times. And I will be the first to say I don't have all the answers, but one thing I do believe, if where the Buddhists say karma, I believe, and we Christians, Catholics say you reap what you sow. So what you put out in the world will come back to you eventually. Um, it may not happen instantaneously, but I believe if you two biggest things in life, I believe are your attitude is the most important, because if you have I mean, and you read the stories of the saints, a lot of them lived very, very difficult lives, but they also lived it with joy. What do they say? Live the Christian life with joy and sometimes preach. Because if you're miserable or you're feeling sorry for yourself, if you're always negative, everyone's gonna be like, well, what do we want with this guy for? I mean, but if you're positive and grateful and always trying to find a silver lining, those are the people I want to be around, of course.
There's a great line from one of the saints that says, "Heaven help us," or "Heaven save us from the sour-faced saint." And again, to your point, and I guess the other thing I would mention is I think it's Hans Urs von Balthasar talking about the notion of the theodrama versus the ego drama, and again and again and again, you've identified that you're a part of a greater narrative, of God's narrative. It isn't Mike Piazza's narrative. And we have a world that's very much about, me, and, it's all about me and how can I grow and enlarge myself. And it's kind of this unbelievable kind of shameless resume self that sort of eclipses the narrative that God has for us in the drama he's unfolding and so on. So you're putting your finger on that.
But also, we have examples of this. Do you understand? It's not like, what do you call it in law? I mean, we have case studies. These cases have been put forward, and all you have to do is do a little research and see the examples that throughout history, if we do, because one of the most powerful things, this is a quote of mine, I've never heard this before. To me, one of the most powerful things you can do is surrender. And I don't mean surrender as in lay down and become weak. I mean is surrender to God's will, throwing it up to Him and realizing that, was that a song? I always loved that song, "Make Me an Instrument of Your Peace." Where there's hatred, let me sow love. But I always loved that song, and I always tried to sort of kind of live that example, at least understand that it's not always about us, and it's not always about our will, as you said, and being able to surrender to that is the hardest thing.
Yeah. Mike, you retired in 2008 with career stats that include 2,127 hits, 427 homers, 1,335 RBIs, and a career batting average of 308. You were, again, the National League Rookie of the Year, 12-time All-Star. The Mets have retired your number, and you're widely considered one of the greatest catchers to ever play the game. In 2016, you were inducted into Cooperstown, the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. Could the 20-year-old kid drafted number 1390 in the 62nd round ever have believed this is the way things would have turned out?
No, not really. I mean, I just put my career and my life up as a testament to just a small miracle, really. I mean, and look, is it easy? No. Could I have scripted it? No way. But I am very, very blessed in that regard. But I will say that you don't necessarily have to be a Hall of Fame baseball player to be successful. And I tell my kids that. And I mean, what we define as greatness is not necessarily being famous or rich. I think we make that mistake because our society will always equate success to money, fame, adulation, people propping you up. And I think, and this sounds really, really crazy. And again, not to get too deep, but I was watching something recently. I'm a war buff, and I was watching the Battle of Midway, and
Sure.
I had this sort of premonition because um, I think it was Dick Betts and McCluskey, all these heroes that flew the missions. But I'm like also thinking, for some reason, I had this thought: what about the guys that were changing the torpedoes to the bombs,
Yeah.
fueling the planes, working on the
Yeah.
engines,
Yeah.
putting the fires out, on the guns and things? And I'm like thinking, okay, thank God for heroes. Thank God for
Yeah.
these guys that went out and performed exemplary under incredibly pressure positions, but they also had to have the help. They also had to
Yeah.
have those guys changing the tires. The crew guys. It's never the guys that, I mean, the crew does celebrate with the race car drivers, but the guys that are the
Yeah.
grease
Yeah.
monkeys and putting the tires on they're not going to get a plaque. They're not going to get,
That's right.
they're not going to get fame. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean they're not doing something great. And so
Exactly.
I think, unfortunately and fortunately, we celebrate our heroes, but those guys that do the work or the hard work that will never be recognized, the guys that are drilling for the oil, the guys that are fixing things and doing stuff, that doesn't mean you're someone's seeing that. Someone knows that
Yeah.
that's a great endeavor. So don't be discouraged.
Segment 4, the greatest gift. In Mike Piazza's Hall of Fame induction speech, he said, "My mother gave me the greatest gift a mother can give a child. She gave me the gift of my Catholic faith. This has had a profound impact on my career, and it has given me patience, compassion, and hope." Pope Benedict XVI said, "One who has hope lives differently." And he went on to say, "Above all, my religion is a source of personal strength, not a reason to impose your will or put down those who are different. My belief in God has driven me since my childhood and formed my core values of hard work, faith, and belief in yourself. It means feeling a need to give back to your teammates, to your community, to our children. Nobody on this stage with me who has shared this incredible honor got here without teammates, community support, and mentors. We all have a responsibility to future generations." So, Mike, you have I've seen you quoted as observing that baseball is a game of failure, but it's also a game of redemption, and that's a very Catholic observation. You've done a wonderful job of weaving into this entire narrative of our conversation your faith. How do you feel like your faith has been most challenged and most edified during your years of play?
Challenged? Well, I think we're always going to go through doubt. We're always going to go through adversity, and that's going to question of why we're sort of praying up to an almighty God of the universe, and the master of heaven and earth, and why he would put us through those things. And
Mhm.
again, to be clear, it has you do have to have a certain amount of perspective, in a sense of keeping things in perspective, because when you see a lot of suffering in the world, and you see adversity and you see pain, you also have to become and go, wait a minute, we did choose this in a way. Like, we did
Mhm.
choose to
Mhm.
be away from God. So that sort of, you make your bed, now you have to lay in it type of thing.
Yeah.
So that perspective also, to me, is been prevalent in my belief system, realizing that when you do have that adversity, unfortunately, we kind of chose that adversity. That's just what we
Yeah.
chose for ourselves. But again, doubts, man. It's always going to happen when you lose a loved one. You lose a job. You have difficulty. You see suffering. It's always going to cause us to waver. But I mean, you do realize that if you do stick it out, there is a reward at the end, and
Yeah.
it's hard to say. I mean, take marriage for example. I mean, I know there's not one perfect marriage on the face of the planet throughout history, but if you do stick it out through the tough times, and it sounds cliche, there is rewards at the end. I mean, my wife says that all the time. She said, "God rewards you for sticking it out, but you do
Yeah.
have to stick it out."
Yeah. 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 Do you, Mike? You also kind of alluded a little bit to mass in your life. I'm just curious. What does the daily practice of faith look like for you? Is it again weekly mass or daily mass? Is there reading prayer? I mean, what is the Catholic walk in the Catholic walk in your personal experience look like nowadays?
I think all of the above. Sometimes I'll go 2, 3 times a week. Sometimes I'll just go once a week. I travel a lot, so it's not always easy to go.
Hmm.
But like if I'm in New York now, I mean it's easy. I can go to St. Patrick's at noonish and things like that. Listen, I just believe that you gotta put the time in. You really do. You have to make the effort. You're only going to get something out of something if you put the effort in. I believe people sometimes are trying, or at least looking for, to be struck by lightning with this sort of profound moment of
Yeah.
epiphany. And it doesn't work that way. I mean, if you read some of the Dark Night of the Soul from Mother
Hmm.
Teresa and whatnot, I think my own little interpretation is like once we try to get closer to God, he pulls us or he pushes us further away to kind of test us to see what we're really all about. Because it's kind of like maybe the older brother holding back the younger brother who's trying to get at him like that. Um, Realizing that if you want to get close to me, um, then you're going to have to go through. It's not that easy, and he's always
Yeah.
going to put those roadblocks in your place. So, um, like I said, I always pray, not to be tested, but we are tested, and it's not easy. But like I tell people, life doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. So try to get through those tough moments and stick it out. And if you do, I truly believe there's a reward at the end.
We just released an issue on conversion for evangelization and culture. And one of the things that I've always thought about is my own conversion to Catholicism in 2010 was unlike a St. Paul, knocked off the horse and, kind of that blinding light and so on and so forth. Mine was more like a thousand brushstrokes on a portrait that was happening over time that I literally couldn't see what the portrait is going to look like until the time came that I looked, stepped back and said, that's what it is. I'm with you in the sense that um, the depth and complexity of our relationship with God is akin to, but much more brilliant and much deeper than the depth and the complexity we have with our spouse, with our kids, and so on. If we don't think that our relationship with our kids or our spouse or our best friend is going to be cheap, but it's going to be many, many layered, profoundly rich fabric, and so on, why would we ever expect something to be shallow with the creator of the universe, including of ourselves? So to your point, there's an incredible amount of depth that we need to be looking at in that relationship. I want to ask you also, as we conclude, last two questions to ask you. In an increasingly faithless age, what advice would you give specifically also to young players? And it could be, yes, those aspiring to become major league baseball players. But let's say young athletes playing in their high school basketball teams, or middle schoolers striving to make the high school team in soccer or whatever it is. What advice would you give to young players that are strained by a degree of cutthroat competition about how faith can help them on their journeys?
I think just to enjoy it. I think to enjoy the teamwork, being part of a team. To me is, I mean, people say, "Well, do you miss it? Do you miss it?" I miss the guys. I miss the team because and I will say this about a team, which again, and I hope I said this before. The one thing I read this really good book about the Navy SEALs, and the one thing about the Navy SEALs is like there is no prejudge determination of what a Navy SEAL is. Doesn't matter if you're black, doesn't matter if you're white, doesn't matter if you're Latin, doesn't matter if you're European background, doesn't matter if you're from Africa. This one SEAL that I recently worked with on a show, Remy Adeleke, he's from Nigeria. He came here as a young kid, and he was a Navy SEAL. My point is this: if you can do the work, you're a brother. You understand? Like
Yeah.
I think this day and age, we're always trying to categorize people, prejudge them based on certain criteria, but it should be based on achievement. It should be based on when you're on a team, like if it didn't matter if you're Dominican, Venezuelan, white guy, black guy from the United States, it didn't matter. You were a teammate and you were my teammate. And so we looked out for each other and we helped each other. And so that's the one thing I think we need to sort of get away from is sort of putting people in a category based on where they're from or what it doesn't matter. If they can be on the team, they're on the team and you're a teammate. And even though teammates sometimes are like family, you're going to get into fights, you're going to get into disagreements. I mean, those relationships are like every day. If I see Edgardo Alfonso, I know he's my brother. I'll go up and hug him and go, "Hey,
Yep.
brother, I miss you." I mean, he was my guy. We had some great years here with the Mets. Um, we got the battle scars. We've been through it, much like probably guys that probably played in wars or excuse me, fought in wars, played in baseball wars, but in the military, they could look at each other and go and know what they've been through and have that special bond, and that's what I miss most.
There's a little bit of Henry V. If you've read Shakespeare's Henry V, when he's rallying the English to go in the Battle of Agincourt against the French, and this is "we few, we marry few, we band of brothers," basically saying it doesn't matter. I'm king, and if you're a guy that basically sweeps the streets back home, but you're here to fight the battle with me, we're brothers. We're forged in blood. We're forged in union. We'll always be that way, kind of going forward. The other thing I want to mention to you, Mike, which is so impressive to me and is so refreshing listening to you tell your story, is the names and names and names of people that flood into your stories. And it lets a person know that our lives are populated with, like you said, mentors and comrades and friends
Mm.
and challengers, and yes, the occasional nemesis and so on, obviously family and so on. But it strikes me that, especially, and I read this in your book, but also the narratives of the interviews you've had, how much you really enjoy the people that have accompanied you and guided you and help you to
Mm.
grow along the way. And that, by the way, that's body of Christ stuff.
Yeah.
That's profound. That's brother to brother, brother to sister. It's impressive. It really is impressive.
Well, I mean, I thank you, and again, not to get into name dropping, but I mean, when here I am as last round pick. Think about this for a second. Last round pick, I go to instructional with the Dodgers in Mesa, Arizona, and Sandy Koufax is down there throwing batting practice,
Oh my
and
gosh.
and so our group is basically I go from junior college player to hitting batting practice against Sandy Koufax, and so yeah, I mean that builds confidence, but that also realizes that you can do it. I mean, I was swinging the bat well. Of course, he was old. He wasn't the Sandy Koufax of the '60s, but still, it,
Right.
it it does inspire you, and you realize that that's the biggest thing for me is that you if you have to look for inspiration, then you're probably looking in the wrong place. I mean, I
Yeah.
think you need to sort of realize that, like you said, and we had discussed earlier, that God puts those people in your life. But if you're so sort of self-loathing and not open to it, you'll never see it. You won't.
Mike Piazza, Catholic husband and father, Hall of Fame baseball player. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's just been a great pleasure talking with you.
Pleasure was mine. God bless.
So I've been thinking, I have to admit, as a baseball fan, having the privilege to chat with Hall of Fame catcher Mike Piazza still gives me goosebumps, or goose flesh, as my mother in law would call it. To be sure, a conversation with any Major League Baseball player is an exciting venture in itself. When a talented young man decides that he wants to pursue a career in professional baseball, the sheer odds are against that he will ever even make it into the major leagues. So the story of aspiration and arrival is captivating. It is often a story of steps and missteps, opportunities gained and opportunities lost, hours of grueling work and moments of pure euphoria. The average major league life is no ordinary life. But Mike Piazza is no ordinary baseball player. He is legendary. As a rookie of the year, a 12-time All-Star, a home run king in his catcher's position, and a Hall of Fame inductee, his resume has very few holes in it. But there's another reason I found our conversation so enlightening. The stories Mike told were not stories of being gloriously hoisted on his teammates' shoulders or being awash in the roar of the thundering crowd after a pivotal home run. No, Mike's stories were about the lessons he learned, the people who helped, and the God who never fails at the very center of it all. Honored by the legendary Ted Williams, telling him off camera that half the battle of good hitting is between the ears. Helped by Tommy Lasorda transitioning him from first baseman to catcher in order to be more attractive in the draft. Gifted by his father erecting a batting cage affixed to the house where he could pitch to the young Mike day after day. Blessed by his mother planting the seed and cultivating the growth of a lifelong faith, and sustained by the unwavering love of his wife and children, these are the people who populated our conversation. And the simple but unflagging message from Mike was, I am blessed, I am grateful, and I couldn't have done it alone. Mike's career in baseball is over, but his memories aren't. As he looks in retrospect, he sees the threads of God and family, friends and mentors woven through the fabric of his career. Were there trials at the University of Miami, at Miami-Dade Community College, in the minor leagues and in the majors? Absolutely. Are there trials even now? Of course. But as Claudia Potter once wrote, still amid the mud and scum of things, something always sings. And so Mike remembers the struggle and the laughter, the uncertainties and the affirmations, the sacrifice and the graces. But in the end, he relishes the joyful ride, the lessons learned, the people who helped, and the God who never fails. What a story. And one last thing. To be sure, read Mike Piazza's engaging biography, Long Shot, which delves deeply and candidly into the life of a kid who loved baseball and the crooked road to make his dream come true. And since this podcast began with a story about Ted Williams, I would also recommend reading John Updike's outstanding 1960 essay from The New Yorker, Hub Fans Bid Kid Adieu, a nostalgic and sublime afternoon spent with a fan watching Ted Williams play his final game with the Boston Red Sox. It is the romance of baseball at its finest. Thank you once again for joining me on the Evangelization Culture Podcast. I'm Todd Warner, and until we meet again, keep bringing Christ to a hungry culture.